Hello students, welcome to week 3. Week 3, we're going to be focusing on a couple different things. We're going to be focusing on multicultural and social justice competencies, among other competencies. Second, we're going to be focusing on the DSM and the cultural formulation interview. And third, we're going to be focusing on implicit bias. And there's a reason that we have these all kind of clumped together. So in our profession, we often will have to make diagnosis for clients. With that being said, we need to be aware of the impact that our diagnosis has on clients, and also, check our own biases as far as why we're selecting certain diagnoses for clients. And so, am I taking cultural norms and using them as a way to label someone or pathologize them with this diagnosis? And so that's kind of getting into the topic of implicit bias that we need to be aware of. And I think that when we think about multicultural counseling and counseling people from different identities than ours, which, I mean, you can sit down with a client who matches all of the identities you can think of, and we still kind of come from different perspectives or different places and experiences. So with that said, we kind of are always doing multicultural counseling, but when we think about multicultural counseling and working with someone who has a different frame of reference than us, one of the most important things we can do is recognize that implicit bias exists, and that no matter what, even if we wouldn't treat someone in a different way, or if logically we know that stereotypes are inaccurate and things like that, oftentimes there is this immediate reaction that comes up. And so when you think of one of those exercises where, like, I'll say a word and you say the first word that comes into your head. If I were to sit here and name an identity and ask you to think of the first word that would come into your head, those things would be biases. Even if they're negative or positive or whatever, they're still biases that we have towards those different identities. And so when you look into the research, studies show that these implicit biases, when we're not acknowledging them and recognizing that they exist, end up playing out without our knowledge or awareness. And so as a counselor, it is extremely important to increase our self-awareness when it comes to these biases. And so that is the third area for this week. So let's start off with taking a look at the work that you're going to be doing this week. When you look at the module introduction, there's a lot of information on there. And so I want to kind of focus you in a little bit. So the first section talks about the cultural formulation interview. This is something that you may have gone over or go over in the future if you have not had diagnosis yet. But in the DSM-5, there's this cultural formulation interview where you can work on talking with the client a little bit more about the ways that their culture has impacted whatever it is that has brought them into counseling. And so sometimes it can feel a little awkward talking about identities and culture, especially sometimes with individuals that are different than us. And so what I have added when you scroll down on the module page is a little bit more information about the cultural formulation interview, and why it's important, why it needs to take place, and how it impacts our diagnosis. But then also a short video that gives a brief example of one person doing it. Now, every counselor doing a cultural formulation interview may not look exactly like that. This is just one example, but it gives you kind of a concrete idea of what that looks like. And so as far as the PDFs that I have attached, one of them is literally straight from the DSM. It is like the pages in the DSM that explain the cultural formulation interview and what it is. The next three, the one is the interview, so the questions and topics that you would bring up with the client. The next one is for an informant. So if there's another person involved in that person's treatment, so let's say it's a child and a parent or spouses or whatever, you can ask them information about the client. And then the third one is just supplementary modules and information that you can look at. And so this does not need to be read front to back. It's more of a guide that you guys will use. The cultural formulation attachment that I have there first, there is a couple pages that you might want to read just to get a general idea of the cultural formulation interview, straight from the DSM, but also watching that first video will help you out a little bit with that. So the second section talks about the different competencies, and boy, there are a lot that I attached. Let's see, there are 8 of them. All of them are important when we talk about cross-cultural and diversity and multicultural counseling, because they touch on the different identities and working with clients in different areas. The one that I want you to really focus on this week, though, is the ACA multicultural and social justice competencies that were created in 2015. And so those are the third one down. The reason is because they touch on the topic that we're working on this semester most closely. The others may be discussed in different courses that you're going to be taking, but this one kind of hits the head on all of the important factors that we need to be aware of or paying attention to, or the things that we need to be competent of in order to go out there and do counseling. And so I would say start from there. That's going to be the one that I want you to focus most in on. And our discussion post for this week ties into that. So that'll be important to review. The next thing on there I have listed is an Implicit Biases podcast. And so this comes from the Culture of Humility podcast with Dr. Giardo. I absolutely love this podcast, and we'll be posting up a number of these or episodes from this podcast throughout the semester. This one is Implicit Biases and the Current Socio-Political Climate. Excuse me. And so this one is relatively recent. It's from March. And so, of course, it doesn't get completely up to date till today, but it has a guest on it, Dr. Milton Fuentes, who discusses the differences between explicit and implicit biases and the role that those unconscious biases can play in sustaining the inequitable and unjust circumstances that have historically and continue to dehumanize communities, which is, definitely talked about in your text. When we look at different historical factors as well as things happening today. So when we look at the Holocaust, when we look at, American slavery of African people and things like that, this is sort of what plays out. And so in the podcast, they discuss the role of implicit bias and that it causes on the discourse on immigration issues, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement and health disparities kind of overall and in general. And so I thought this was a really great episode and really fit well with the topics that we're discussing this week. So I hope that you have a chance to listen to that. I think most of them are about an hour long. This where I'm looking at on the website, it doesn't say, but most of these episodes are an hour, maybe a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, depending. So it shouldn't be bad, but I think that you will gain a lot from listening to that. And so this week, even though it seems overwhelming with all of these links that I've posted, it actually is a light reading week. Really all you're reading is those couple pages about the cultural formulation. You're reading the multicultural and social justice competencies, maybe scanning some of the others. You're listening to this podcast and then watching the 2 videos that I posted. We are going to be meeting this Thursday. So if you have any questions about this, because it's not material from the textbook, just let me know and I can help you. I think that I might even have an article about implicit biases that I'll be able to post up for you guys. So if I can find that, I'll post it up with this video. And then we get into sort of the assignment for this week. That will be the week 2 discussion that is on, like I said, the multicultural and social justice competencies. So I have a link to the file, but talking about where you see yourself in your work with your clients and how you feel like this impacts or will impact your relationship with clients depending on the different identities you hold. And so with the multicultural and social justice competencies has this kind of diagram that you can see. Actually, let me go ahead and share my screen if I can. Oh, there it goes. All right. So what we're going to be looking at is, this is inside of that article, but I also have put it right here in the discussion post, is that there may be levels of identities where we might be considered privileged as the counselor, and some areas where we may be considered marginalized as the counselor. And then with our clients, they may be considered privileged in some ways, in some identities, and marginalized in other ways. And kind of where we fall in this and our particular clients fall in this are going to have a big impact on the relationship that we build with them, as well as the work that we do with them. And so we should be able to kind of navigate this a little differently depending on that. And in many ways, this involves having a conversation with our clients. You know, if a client, you know, for example, I have a client who identifies as African American, and you know, she has brought up issues that she has where it comes to kind of being judged and marginalized in different ways by white individuals. And so we've had the conversation about what that's like for her to have a white person as a counselor, and the impact that that has on our relationship and the work that we do. I had another conversation with a client who also identifies as African American, who said that she really actually struggles to trust white men. And even though I'm not a man, that's not my gender identity, I am a white person. And so we, you know, have had the conversation about how that is related as well. And even if those clients had said that they struggle trusting, you know, other people of color or other Black individuals, we would still need to kind of discuss the cultural implications of that, and how those factor into the relationship, because we are living in the world. And even though the counseling space can kind of feel like a little bubble, it's not. The world and our identities are impacting us at any given moment. And again, we all have those implicit and explicit biases that are inside of us. And so this kind of talks about how important it is to have counselor self-awareness of ourselves and our biases, the client's worldview and how they see things, their beliefs and value systems and all of that. And then the counseling relationship and the way that we kind of have this, this relationship and working style together, and things like that. And then also it branches out to counseling and advocacy interventions. And as counselors, we're called to be advocates and allies. And so what are we doing? How are we taking the stuff that's happening in those sessions and doing something with it, whether it's encouraging our clients to advocate for themselves or others, and us going out there advocating for our profession and others, and so on. And so this is a really important model, and I hope that you're able to learn a lot from reading, you know, the competencies. And actually, I have an article about the competencies too. I'll post up that talks a little bit more about the competencies and sort of the purpose of them. But hopefully, you enjoyed this particular discussion post, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. And I also look forward to talking with you all live this week. I don't believe this week we're going to have a guest speaker, but for a number of the synchronous meetings that I have scheduled, I have a number of different speakers mostly in the counselor and counselor education world. I have one individual who is a professor of pharmacy talking with us, but I have a number of great topics, great people who are coming in to talk to us. So hopefully you all enjoy that, and the weeks that we don't have guest speakers, we can just kind of talk about the topics either in the discussions or in the readings for that week. So have a great week. Let me know what comes up for you guys. Thanks. Bye.